Good morning and welcome, everyone. You're very welcome to our webinar today. If we haven't met, my name is Anne-Marie McStalker, the Health and Wellbeing Lead for the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service Trust. On behalf of Deborah Hunter and Sonia Montgomery from the Western Health and Social Care Trust and the Regional Workforce Wellbeing Group, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar today. Before I hand over to Dr. Deborah Lee, I just want to cover some housekeeping. We aim to send the video recording to everyone registered today, which will include an evaluation, and we would encourage you to complete the evaluation and return it to us. My contact details are on the slide if you have any queries after the event. Due to the large number of people attending today, the cameras and mics have been disabled, as has the chat box and the question answers. I want to thank Deborah Hunter and Sonia Montgomery, who first raised the idea of having a regional event on the topic of compassion. On behalf of them, I would like to acknowledge the Public Health Agency for part funding the event. And I also want to thank my own senior team at NIAS for committing to support this webinar and indeed this important area of work. I want to thank Tally Knipe at EventWise for bringing this event to life and facilitating today. We just couldn't have done it without you, Tally. To the 500 colleagues plus here today and the over 100 colleagues on a waiting list, I want to thank you for prioritising this webinar. In particular, as strike action is ongoing. We have scheduled to close at 11:30. So without further ado, can I introduce and thank Dr. Deborah Lee for your interest in supporting the health and social care family by bringing your vast experience, your expertise and knowledge to us today. You are very welcome, and I have my pen and paper ready to learn from you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne-Marie, for that lovely, warm welcome. And I'm so delighted to be here with you all this morning, and so thrilled that so many of you are interested in the topic of compassionate wellbeing, compassionate leadership in the workplace. It is a passion of mine, and I hope to impart that to you today. And what I'd like you to do for the next hour and a half is just to sit back, relax, get a nice cup of tea and just listen. We'll send you the slides, you'll have the recording. But as you're listening to some of the concepts, some of the ideas, just think about yourself and think about your team. Hold your team in mind and hold yourself in mind, and just see how the dust settles on some of the information. And it's a strange journey in a way for me that I'm here talking about compassionate leadership, because I am a clinical psychologist by trade and training, and I spend most of my time running clinical services, trauma services and veteran services. And I'm actually involved in running a treatment trial at the moment with some lovely colleagues from Northern Ireland and the Trust. So hello out there for you, for helping me with this. And it was only because I did a talk in 2016 or 15 it was now, for my trust on, why do we end up behaving, badly to each other? And, why does patient care drop when we're feeling very, very stressed? And it was in the light of various sort of like big reports that came out. So I did a talk called Why Do Good People End Up doing bad things? And I did it to a disgruntled workforce in my own trust that were feeling very bullied, very put upon, a lot of threats, and another kind of grumblings. Well, this is all very well, but it's not going to go anywhere. But it did, because our new CEO, our chief exec, gave me a chance. And he said, Deborah, if you can develop a compassionate leadership program that is targeting leadership and well-being, then you can do it. And I did. And I felt a little bit at the time like the Catherine Tate character that goes, oh, I can do that, thinking, what on earth am I going to do? But I developed a program and I've rolled it out for 5 years, and over 3/4 of our staff have now been exposed to the principles of compassionate wellbeing and leadership in our trust. And we were awarded an outstanding by the Care Quality Commission, and my CEO, Julian Ems, is very keen to point out that the leadership program he feels is very much integral to our award of outstanding in leadership. So that's why I'm here today. And for the next hour and a half, I'm going to hopefully make the case for compassion, in case some of you out there are not convinced, although I have a feeling you've voted on your feet. I'm just going to touch on perhaps why staff burnout occurs in our workplace, and really what is a compassionate approach to well-being and leadership and how it actually works. So I will kind of touch on briefly on our research, but actually then give you a little taster really of the compassionate program that we've rolled out. And then hopefully we will talk about compassion habits so that you have something to take home, and really that you can begin today thinking about compassion, because it begins at the heart of you. And I just want to start by saying, whoever you are and whatever job role you are in, you are a caregiver. You work for an organization which delivers care, which means that you spend your working day looking after people that aren't a member necessarily of your gene pool or your kinship, strangers for most of you. And that is a deeply humanitarian motivation, okay, that you have decided for whatever reasons to train or to work for an organization where you care for others to alleviate suffering. And don't ever forget what a phenomenal, amazing motivation and pursuit and job that is. And therefore, it is a real tragedy when that good nature, that compassionate nature, that desire to care for others is somehow eroded and corrupted by the way that we set up organizations that we work within. You see, I don't need to say this to you, but the NHS and social care has a real problem on its hands. We really struggle to sustain inclusive, people-centered cultures. We've got terrible recruitment and retention problems. We're not treating our staff well, they're leaving. It's a buyer's market. This has a massive impact on the infrastructure of experience. So if you can compete with different trusts, again, and where I'm speaking from in England and in Oxford, another trust might offer a higher level of package or a higher grade to someone who's more junior, then infrastructure starts to erode. So you've got less experienced people in senior leadership and supervisory roles trying to do what they can, because everybody wants more money, but actually it's not necessarily the best leadership and management structure. And of course, we've got terrible sickness problems. In sort of rather, doomy, gloomy reports, we see all the time that a significant percentage, and sometimes up to 50% of our workforce are reporting feeling unwell. And that was pre-COVID. So we were already a really tired out, fatigued workforce before COVID hit us. And burnout is a real hazard in a job, a caregiver's job. And we are more kind of vulnerable to burnout because it is linked to emotional hazards and the numerous emotional hazards that we face in the pursuit of caring for others. And it can affect all of us at any age. None of us are immune to it. But if we don't look after ourselves, we're more likely or perhaps more vulnerable to being exposed to it. But it manifests primarily as emotional overload, emotional exhaustion, emotional fatigue, not physical, but emotional overload and exhaustion. And that's really important that we hold that in mind, because there are things that we can do, that we can truly do, that make a real impact on our emotional well-being. Emotional well-being, emotional fitness, as I sometimes describe it, is a little bit like getting physically fit. You need to know what to do, you need to learn what to do, and then you need to keep on doing it. You need to look after yourselves. We all need to look after ourselves, because nothing matters if we're dead. And the graveyards are full of irreplaceable people. All right. And you matter, and your life matters, and the work that you do matters. So it's so important that we keep ourselves well, and we keep our colleagues well, so that we do the best that we can to deliver good quality patient care. I'm not going to pay too much attention to this list of contributing factors. You can read about it at leisure if you'd like to in the slides. But, we are also vulnerable to vicarious traumatization. So if we are working with people that have been through really difficult traumatic events, or are attending to people who have been involved in traumatic events, there is a kind of a catch-on effect when we're listening to stories, really distressing, upsetting stories of people's lives, or attending to physical injuries. There is a kind of a catching effect, a cumulative effect of building up exposure to trauma. we're often subjected to a public who are disgruntled by the healthcare and social care systems that they are receiving for very good reasons. And it's not our fault, but we're often on the line on the receiving end of either being sort of like held up in such high regard and then sort of demonized in the next breath, or, you know, we have complaints put into us which aren't necessarily about us, they're about the system. But it can feel very personal when you're working so hard to do your absolute best, and it's absolutely gutting when we get things like complaints. It's really difficult when we're working in systems where we feel that it's a bit of a blame culture, so that we don't feel sort of like a team behind us if somebody gets a complaint. And something that we always do in my service, if any of us get complaints, and occasionally we do, you know, I'm very keen to say this is our complaint. You know, this is for us, it's not you, you're just delivering the service and the service model that I developed. So this is our complaint, and we will deal with it with a wise, kind, curious mind, so that we can think about how we could do things better, take stock of feedback, and just seek to understand. So there is something about the relationship we have with our work which is hugely important in maintaining our well-being. And if we don't, then there is a cost to caring. And sometimes burnout's a little bit, we don't want to ever get to burnout, because it's quite difficult to recover back from. You know, once you've been working at such levels and you get to that point of making yourself emotionally and psychologically ill, it's a tricky one to ever come back to work at those levels, and you wouldn't want to. Because ultimately, if you're in this state, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not prioritizing your needs. So if you're noticing any of these symptoms, even sort of, the beginnings or the rumblings of these sorts of systems, please just take stock and have a really good think about what you're doing to yourself. Because if you don't keep your home fire burning, if you can't stoke up you, then none of us will feel your glow. And as I said before, what you do is deeply important. It matters. There are so many other jobs out there, as we know, that pay more money and have much less kind of emotional cost and stress. But we're choosing to do this. So it's just so important we look after ourselves. We can't solve the problems of the underfunding. We can't solve the problems of sort of cuts to and the under recruitment. What we can do is be decent to each other. What is free is the way we treat ourselves and the way we treat our colleagues. That is free, and that will make an enormous difference to the workforce and our well-being. There is a cost to caring, but it isn't compassion fatigue. And I just want to make that point. It's empathy distress. It's empathy fatigue, over-identification with suffering and feeling hopelessness. Feeling helpless and hopeless. Compassion is a motivation, and compassion keeps us hopeful and keeps us action orientated. It isn't compassion fatigue, it's exhaustion we're feeling. And it's rather a tricky one to think about it as fatigue and compassion, because compassion is a motivational system. Compassion is a motivation. So the question we need to be asking ourselves as leaders and managers within organization is, what on earth has happened to our staff where they are feeling that motivation is inhibited? So we need to be thinking about how can we facilitate that motivation, given the very testing times that we are working and living in. So the seas are stormy out there. But while we're on the same boat, let's make sure that crew is rooting for each other and we're together and looking after ourselves where the seas are stormy. And we've got a problem because we're already coming from a legacy of top-down dominant control styles and leadership within NHS and social care. That we've got that legacy behind us for whatever reasons. And top-down dominant control styles just simply don't work. They stifle motivation and they stifle creativity, and they're not a good match for a caregiving business. So they actually suffocate that intrinsic motivation and altruistic nature. So we need to do something different. And I have to say, at best, it's through lack of awareness that NHS and social care have taken advantage of taken stock of this. And at worst, they've taken advantage of it. And what I mean by that is that it's very easy to take advantage of people's good caregiving nature. Because we care, we find it really difficult to kind of rest and sit with giving people bad messages or messages about wait times, or not just squeezing a little bit of extra something in so that somebody else doesn't have to. So we are, as caregivers, a little bit vulnerable for being sort of overworking and perhaps taken advantage of, perhaps by managers that aren't necessarily coming from the most compassionate perspective. So as I say, at best, this happens through lack of awareness, but at worst, actually, people of good nature and caregiving nature can be taken advantage of. Caregiving is compassion. Compassion should absolutely be at the heart of everything we do within the NHS and social care, and it should be seen at every level, right up from the CEO, right down to the groundswell of support staff, administrative staff, and clinical frontline staff everywhere. This is our business. And if we're going to really address compassionate well-being and compassionate leadership, it has to be from a groundswell. We're all in this together. We have to have top-down buy-in. It's not enough for senior leaders to say, yes, do something about it, but I'm not doing it. So in our leadership program, all the exec, all the non-exec, all the senior leaderships, and every sort of general member of the workforce have been exposed and signed up to the principles of compassionate leadership. It's not a title, it's not a position, leadership, it's an action and an example. And that's why it is literally for everybody. And we learned something when we set up our compassionate leadership program, because we called it the compassionate leadership program. And some people didn't sign up because they didn't think it was them, because they didn't think they were in a position of leadership. Yes, you are. If you're a human being and you work with a team, you're in a position of leadership, because it's about action and example. And we really want to bring about this notion of emotional equality. Of course, there are infrastructures. Of course, there are management structures. We've got to have some kind of hierarchy so that we have leaders and managers that execute shared goals. But what we can have is emotional equality, so that we pitch up as human beings, equal psychologically and emotionally, even though we're being led within a kind of a formal hierarchical structure. If you are in a position of power, please be aware of it. Please be aware of it, because those below you will feel it. Even if you think you're the most friendly, approachable, non-kind of power person, your juniors will always be aware of it. So we need to bring curiosity and a genuine like for humanity. And this is problematic when human beings can be naughty. And we can get up to all sorts of things, and we can get up to all sorts of shenanigans and interpersonal relationships. And we can get a bit burnt out with being human and our relationship with the people that we work with. So can you imagine being a David Attenborough character and with his love and curiosity for the planet and wildlife? Can you imagine being that kind of just gently curious about human nature, observing it, wise observer, and not getting hooked into the drama, but just being curious? So that leads me to moving on to the definition of compassion. If we're talking about compassionate well-being and compassionate leadership, of course, we just need to have some sense that we're on the same page. Now, there are many people have defined it. It's part of all major world religions. It's been defined by scientists in all sorts of ways, but there are some general kind of commonalities, and that is that compassion is about a recognition of suffering and an understanding of its universality. That means that we all suffer, common humanity. That doesn't mean to say that we all suffer in the same way. And as that famous line, we're not all in the same boat at all, because some of us have got rafts and some of us have got cruise liners. But everyone suffers, and some of us sadly have to suffer more than others through no fault of our own. But we can bring genuine sympathy and empathy to that suffering and concern for those who are suffering. That's the engagement part. But compassion also has an action part, a motivation to be able to alleviate it. So if we're acting with compassionate well-being, if we're acting through compassionate leadership, we have to be able to engage with the suffering of our workforce rather than turn a blind eye. Now, I've heard some fairly shocking horror stories over the last few years, including some trusts in the UK whereby, you know, the CEO didn't even turn up on the front line to see their staff working away. You've got to engage with the suffering if you're going to lead with compassion. And leadership is for everybody. And what it means is it's a commitment to lead through values of compassion, being motivated to want to alleviate the distress that we see, to create connectedness, to create safeness, psychological safeness. I've got you. I've got you. I've got your back. I've got you in mind. I want to do the best by you. And in order to do that, we have to have self-awareness. We've got to become aware of ourselves, the version of ourselves that we kind of launch in our unsuspecting public, or we launch in our teams. How do our teams experience us as a co-colleague or as a leader? So we need to be self-aware and promote affiliation and this sense of emotional and psychological equity. So compassionate well-being, compassionate leadership, the focus is on relationships, 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 through the skills of engagement and nurturing those relationships. The David Attenborough curiosity, careful listening, empathizing, valuing, supporting, empowering. We're in this together. Let me help you. How can I help you? Celebrating. So every week at our team meeting, we have a moment of celebration where we nominate someone that we've noticed has done, as we call it, a glimpse of brilliance, which we called it until we realized that the acronym was a GOB. So now we talk about who's the GOB this week, glimpse of brilliance. And we just celebrate, you know, our admin who had a really heartfelt conversation with one of our clients on the call, or a lovely piece of feedback, something that we're celebrating our daily lives. Now, the problem with all of this is, folks, that compassion can't flourish in a competitive mindset. It can't flourish in a competitive culture, and it can't flourish in a threat-focused culture. And unfortunately, some of the environments we find ourselves in are that. So there is lots of work to be done to change the emotional landscape of which we work in. And I just wanted to draw your attention to this notion of relationships. You know, human beings are everywhere, and from the moment we're born, we're forming relationships with our families, with our siblings, with our friends, with our teachers, with our intimate partners, with our colleagues, with our managers. And there has been a recent publication of a wonderful book called The Good Life, which is based on the Harvard Happiness Study, which has been running since 1938. So sort of good old, nearly just short of 90 years. And it's interviewed the original participants, their children, and their children's. And there are some rather striking, shocking outcomes. I just want to headline a few. Loneliness is as toxic as smoking. Loneliness is more predictive of health than obesity. Friendships at work improve productivity, but it's also lonely at the top because it's difficult to truly be friendly with people that you have to lead and manage at times. At the age of 50, being in a good relationship is doubly predictive of health at 80 when compared to things like cholesterol levels. But it's not the number of people you have in your life, it's the quality of the relationship, not the number of friends, but the quality. And what I mean by that is how safe they make you feel. A friendship that sees you, hears you, knows you, understands, validates, and helps you, has got you in mind and is rooting for you. That's the quality of a relationship. And what is most important at the end of people's lives? The quality of their relationships, not the job that they did, but the quality of their relationships. So don't deprioritize your friends and your family. Don't cancel your social arrangements. Don't be monosyllabic, grumpy, and moody with those that will be with you in the end days of your life, because that's what life is about and that's what matters. So I just want to carry on with my case for compassion, because my colleague, Marcela Matos from the Compassionate Mind Foundation, did a wonderful piece of research during COVID. And it, again, is very compelling. The universal protection of self-compassion in resilience, the universal magnifying effects of the fears of compassion in mental ill health. So when we all went into COVID and we were stopped from seeing our friends and families, we were isolated and at times very lonely. Our mental health was buffered by our internal self-compassion and compassion from others. That is quite important. Social connection is key. It facilitates post-traumatic growth. So that's important when we're thinking about compassionate well-being. Connectedness and safeness is important. And in contrast, social disconnection leaves us vulnerable to all sorts of things, including post-traumatic stress. And remember, one of our key ingredients in burnout is vicarious trauma. So compassion is all sounding rather good, and it's linked to social connectedness, and it's linked to the quality of our relationships and our sense of safeness. And if we have compassion, if we practice self-compassion, then we are much more likely to be mentally resilient and have much lower levels of psychopathology. Brain scans show that just brief compassion-focused exercises results in a reduced cortisol production and increased heart rate variability. Increased heart rate variability is a sign of well-being. And I'll talk to you about this later. But if you want to improve your heart rate variability, learn to breathe in a particular way. There's nature's gift for you. Walking around in every breath that you take is a gift to your well-being. And I'll talk about that later. Self-compassion is linked to lower levels of worry and rumination, and it's related to higher levels of cognitive flexibility. When we are self-compassionate, we're engaging in the kind of the higher frontal lobes of our mind. So imagine a big castle with all our wisdom and all the goodies of, mental planning and higher order problem solving. And as I said, mentalizing and empathizing, all the things that help us become a social genius. And imagine a drawbridge coming down into the castle and the moat surrounding the castle. Imagine that moat is full of the physiology associated with self-compassion, oxytocin and sort of opiate-based substrates. And when that moat is full of the physiology that's linked to self-compassion, then the drawbridge comes down and in you enter your frontal lobes, the castle of your wisdom. And there you have access to things that will keep you well. So cultivating compassion is sounding like a very good idea because it's so linked to our well-being, and it potentially helps with burnout and vicarious trauma. And of course, even if we're working in systems that are really kind of spent and on the edge and just feeling rather broken, you can be the drop in the ocean for yourself. You start with you, your self-compassion, start looking after you. Maybe your colleagues will start looking after themselves. Maybe your team will start looking after yourself. Maybe the system will start looking after yourself. And the ripple effect eventually creates waves. I've seen it happen in our own healthcare trust over 6 years or so. But once it happens, you've got to keep it going. You can't just get physically fit and then rest on your laurels. If you want emotional fitness, you have to commit to it for keeping yourself emotionally fit. So we've now got this kind of interaction between compassion, caregiving, that creates psychological safeness. And when we're safe, we feel a better quality of our relationships. And remember, it's the quality of our relationships, not the quantity, that really matters. So compassion is linked to safeness, is linked to relationships. Now, I said this at the beginning, and I said you can't have compassion fatigue if you understand that compassion is a motivation. And that means that compassionate leadership is a motivation. And what we need to be doing is inspiring people to want to lead through this motivation. Compassionate leadership is for all of us, and it is absolutely linked to our well-being. So how do we inspire ourselves? How do we inspire our teams to want to lead through this leadership when some of us are feeling really disenfranchised, really burnt out, really exhausted. I've made the case, I think, about why it's highly beneficial to us. Now we've got the problem of thinking, goodness me, what on earth is inhibiting us? If we look at our team functioning, what is inhibiting that basic motivation? And I'll say this again, because it's so important. We really have got to be asking ourselves, what on earth has happened to whole systems when we've got these workforce of people who have committed and dedicated their lives to work with caregiving, to help others, to help strangers, to alleviate suffering? What have we done? What have we done to ourselves? What have we done to each other? What have the system done to us that inhibits that motivation? And what can we do? And what can we do now to facilitate that motivation? So for me, it's really important that we bed any type of well-being project and leadership project in the science of being human. So I've mentioned David Attenborough a couple of times already. He roots his understanding in science. He's curious. All his programs are just so enriching when you watch them. That's what we need to do with our leadership and well-being programs. We've got to study human beings. We are not studying the ape compound. We're not looking at the the orca whale. We're looking at humans. We've got to be curious. We've got to understand the science of how human beings function. And if we get that right, then we've got the answers to things around well-being and leadership when we're working in groups of people. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly mention, just very quickly, the Berkshire Healthcare sort of compassionate leadership model, because we started with this. What is getting in the way of our basic motivation to be helpful? What are we looking at? The barriers, and we're looking at the enablers. And our barriers to well-being were team fragmentation. Some people couldn't even define what team they were in, and they might have been in various different teams. Competitive culture was another big problem for the well-being. As I said to you, you can't promote well-being in a competitive culture. So we've got to understand the nature of competitive cultures in order to do something about it. And of course, these terrible workload and organizational pressures, when the problem, for instance, to solve the waiting list is put right on the practitioner, who is just at breaking point. So we looked at what were the barriers, and then we looked at what the enablers, and we tried to implement the enablers through the leadership program. And we set ourselves a task. So this is back in 2016. And I couldn't believe, actually, we said, oh, by 2020. It was actually 2015, I think, we'll have done this. And now it's 2023. And we got there, and we've done it, but we need to keep it alive. And we now have a business as usual model whereby people come to our trust. They go to the trust induction, and they get a little 30-minute video of me introducing them to compassion and saying, this is how we treat each other around here. This is how we treat each other. And, if you're not feeling treated like that, then come and talk to us, and we will do what we can to help. So the original rollout was 18 months, and we did a 2-day workshop, 1 day on self-compassion and 1 day on team compassion. And then we did a 1-day self-compassion for all the workforce. We ran these big workshops 4 times a year. We even had a waiting list of 100 people on the waiting list. It was the most popular CPD in the trust, and I was feeling rather chuffed by that until somebody pointed out that my competition was, mandatory hand washing and information governance. But, I still hold on that people are thirst. They have a thirst for self-compassion. And most people are completely shocked that it's about them, because we're so used to being trained to do something to make us better practitioners, to make the care that our population receive better. But actually it was for us. So at the end of the rollout, we trained over 1,500 teams, and we evaluated them. But now we've trained over 3/4 of our workforce. We're 4,500 workforce. And we just wanted to know what was getting in the way and what was helping, and how do we sustain it. And what we know is we're much more compassionate after we did the program. There was a drop-off, interestingly, and that really hit home the need to habit form, compassion habits, daily compassion habits, daily commitment to keeping this alive. We're being more self-compassionate. And again, there's a drop-off over time. So we really need to root this in on our compassion habits. Okay. And we need to think about what's going to change. What are the mechanisms for change? So if we've got team fragmentation, what are we literally going to do to make the team come together? And it's so important post-COVID, because people have got used to these hybrid working, which is lovely, working a bit from home and a bit in the place, but there is a massive impact from not being around people every day, because, you know, there are seven functions of work and only 7 benefits of work, sorry, I should say, for a human being, and only one of them is actually, you know, the work, producing the work. A lot of it is social and connectedness. So as I say, we're now business as usual. It's rooted in our Excellent Managers program. We have these big one-day events for everybody. And I go into teams. I offer team coaching. I look after teams that are struggling. It's a bit like, you know, compassionate family therapy. As I have senior leadership teams whereby I'm coaching and developing compassionate reflective practice with them, so that they can create safe spaces to reflect on the way that they lead in their teams. We have compassion champions that are flying the flag for compassion. And so it is really about rooting it in, embedding it in the culture. So the guiding principles really are creating safe working environments. You know, we want to come to work and feel safe. We want to come to work and feel physically safe and psychologically safe. No one should come to work and feel bullied, excluded, disenfranchised, marginalized. You know, it's an utter outrage that we would treat other human beings like that. And it's a choice. The problem is it's quite easy to do. It's quite easy to, you know, lord the power and lord it over people. So we've got to be self-aware. We've got to create physically safe environments, and we've got to create psychologically safe environments where we promote health and well-being. We've got to look after ourselves. I've said it again, I'll say it again. You matter. If you don't keep your home fires burning, if you don't prioritize your needs to look after yourself, game over. Nobody will feel the glow. So learn to regulate your emotions, learn to become self-aware, learn to create a positive relationship with your work. Your work is not going to change. The tasks aren't changing, but your relationship to the task, your ability to stay focused and present in the task matters. It matters to your well-being. You could have 10 tasks to do, and you could go into work going, I've got 10 tasks, I've got so much to do, I've got so much to do. Well, why is everyone emailing me? I haven't got time to take that call. No, I've got 10 tasks to do. I've got 10. Oh my God, I'm so late. And you would do those 10 tasks and you'd arrive home exhausted and monosyllabic and not answering the phone call or answering the door to, you know, friends. Or you could come to work with, I have 10 tasks to do. So I'm going to ground myself. I'm going to orientate my mind. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to look after myself. I'm going to focus on this task. I'm going to set my boundaries, put my email off, can't answer the phone, catch up with you later, boundary my work and get through the task. And every task I do with commitment and purpose. You'll still do the 10 tasks, but the version at you at the end of the day will be quite different. You know, we have to promote compassionate practices. We've got to promote boundaries. If you're working from home, it's very difficult now, isn't it, to kind of just like everything sort of like seeps into each other. You know, years ago when we had desktops, nobody was lugging their desktop home every night. Nobody. None of us were sitting with our desktops on the sofa next to us just in case somebody emailed us. But we have to foster good relationships with our teams too. We spend a lot of time with our teams. And I think there's some horrible research out there, isn't there? They're saying we spend more times with our teammates than we do with our loved ones and our family. So if we are going to spend all that time with our lovely teammates, let's sure that we make it the best experience and kind of raise our game to be the best version that we are, to communicate with honesty and authenticity, to look out for each other, to take time to connect, take time to get to know each other. Teams that socialize together function better. and really have the courage to engage with conflict, have the courage to engage. We're very interpersonally avoidant. We're very interpersonally conflict avoidant. We don't like to upset people's feelings. We like to be liked. Doesn't help with full and frank and authenticity. So let's pitch up with kindness and openness. So what does the program look like? Well, our program is rooted in science. So it starts with us understanding really the science of being human, and let's understanding ourselves. So this is the bit, folks, where I'd just like you to just sit back and listen and have a think about yourself, and just think about what I'm saying and how it lands in your minds. Human beings have evolved over millions of years on the planet. We have evolved human brains, and our human brains aren't necessarily kind of fit for purpose. They're really tricky. We've got a part of our brain that's reptilian, very territorial, likes to compete, very territorial, doesn't like hot desking, tries to undermine hot desking by putting a mug down with your name on it, your initial on it, marking your scent with your jacket, putting your family screensaver on it just so everybody knows it's yours. Some people even get up early to go into work early so that they can get their seat that they're hot desking on. We're very territorial. Basic motivations. We also are social animals, so we hang out in groups. We're designed to hang out in groups. We have groups everywhere. And we have ways of ordering our groups that come from very primitive parts of our brain. The most predominant way we order our groups are hierarchies. So we spend our lives making hierarchies. And if we were an animal, it's much easier to make a hierarchy because we can just work out whose antlers are bigger than whose. My antlers are bigger than yours, so pipe down and know the pecking order. I am the alpha lion here, so my roar is bigger than yours, so pipe down in the pecking order. I'm the alpha female here, so pipe down in the pecking order. And we all know the pecking order. The problem is in our tricky human brains that the pecking order starts to become a little bit sort of less obvious because we don't know quite what it is. It's not just about who's got the biggest muscles, although sometimes it is, but it's about who is the most senior. That's a very obvious one. But what about who's the most intelligent, or who's the most socially attractive, or who's the most successful, or who's clever enough, and who's likable enough? And on we go with these terrible hidden hierarchies that become torturous as we compare ourselves with others. Social comparison is at the heart of all major psychopathology and human distress. Remember that, folks, social comparison, okay? Because when we're human, we've got the hierarchies, we've got the territorial stuff going on, and then we've got this human brain that can think. We've got evolved social intelligence, and that's supposed to make us more socially intelligent. It can be creative, it can remember things, it can be empathic, it can learn, it can plan, it can do all these sorts of things. And it's supposed to make us a social genius because we are by nature social animals. Okay, that doesn't mean that we like to go to parties, although I do know in Northern Ireland you like to socialize a lot. But what it means is that we are motivated to form relationships. We're never supposed to do this alone. We've got huge brains that have got massive social processing systems, okay? And we are radaring social threat all the time. Social threat creates more cortisol in us than physical threat. Just rest on that thought, folks. Social threat is big business for the human brain. We really need to belong. We need to feel loved and we need to belong. Love me, don't leave me. And however fancy we are and however much we say, oh, I don't need people, I don't care. Yes, we do, because we're biologically designed to care because it's rooted in our attachment system. So we've got big radaring brains for social threats. Funny little frowns on people's faces will radar. Walking into a room and thinking people are talking about us, not feeling safe, will get more social threat than physical threat. Not being invited to the party, feeling left out, because it's linked to our survival. So remember that the problem with being human is that we've got two big motivations, because we've got this tricky brain. We've got the reptilian brain, we've got the mammalian brain, and we've got the animal, the human brain. And so we are capable of competition. We're capable of using threat and competition to get what we want in life and to overpower humans and make humans do what we want. But we're also capable of inspiring and caring for human beings and looking after each other. One creates safety, the removal of threat, and the other system creates safeness, the state of being connected. And they are very different physiological systems. They come from very different brain systems. They're linked to different physiologies, and they're linked to genes and epigenetics. And both of them are there in the human mind. So the system that we choose to engage in and operate by will highly depend on the social context. So in essence, we are all capable of great cruelty given the right social context. And we really need to choose which part of our mind we want to feed in order that it develops and dominates. So I know that looks like a pretty horrible list on the left-hand side, the red list, and that's the extremists of this competition in human nature. But at the other end of it, we've got, bullying, being nasty, treating people badly, leaving people out, all part of the competitive mindset. So folks, we've got a tricky brain. And let's just remember that none of us sat on a cloud and chose to be born into the lives that we are living. And we certainly didn't design our human brain. It's been designed and developed for us, and it's really tricky. Okay. And we have a lot of stuff going on in our human brain, a lot of social comparison, a lot of self-criticism. It's a byproduct of this, and it's not our fault. It's not our fault. We've got the old brain capacity and the new brain capacity, and we've got, our thinking and our ruminating and all sorts of other things. It's not our fault. But if we want well-being, we need to learn how to cultivate the garden. If we're living in a garden that's overgrown with weeds and needs lots of tending, and we plant the seed of compassion, we need to cultivate it and look after it, because otherwise we are very prone to this competitive mentality. There are two ways that we create atmospheres in ourselves and at work. One is through competition and social comparison, and the other is through caregiving. Get safe, create safeness. Now, this competitive mentality is a byproduct of the hierarchy. My antlers are bigger than your antlers. But with humans, as I said, these systems where we outplay power are not that obvious. So when we're comparing ourselves to others because we're feeling less than, not good enough, not clever enough, not intelligent enough, we're going to make ourselves feel really rather rubbish. So we call this down rank. We're going to make ourselves feel really rubbish. And we're going to be very angry and internalize that in self-criticism. So if you're out there feeling very self-critical and noticing that you walk around in a very critical kind of commentary mind, first off, you're not alone. Join the club, join the human club. It's a byproduct of the competitive mentality. It's not your fault. The other way out of a hierarchy is to uprank. So actually, there are people out there that wander around actually feeling superior and entitled. They think that they are better than other people, and they're very prone to humiliation. How dare you, how dare you? Okay, and they get aggressive and they project their aggression onto others. Okay, and if you've got somebody in a position of power that thinks that they're better than another human being, that's going to be problematic, because they're going to play out their power and they're going to downrank you, and you're going to feel less than. But there is another way, the caregiving mentality. This is what's rooted in compassion, that we have the qualities and the skills to actually be curious and interested in creating emotional environments in ourselves and others, looking after each other's. That's the uniqueness of humans. We've got emotional caregiving systems. I mean, surely at some point we'll discover that so do animals, but for the moment, humans are claiming it for themselves. We look after each other emotionally, and that, my goodness, is so important to well-being. It's rooted primarily when it gets to the physical manifestations of stuff. That's when it's gone horribly wrong. So just think about this brain, our lovely brain. Got so many nice qualities, but unfortunately, because we've got these two systems, the competition and the compassion, it's like walking on a knife edge. So the bits that give us empathy and theory of mind, make us a social genius, because I understand that your mind exists, can also be the source of our external shame. We can really worry about what people think of us. I don't know if any of you out there are kind of caught up in the worry about what people think of you, post-morteming things all the time. We've got a brain that can remember and learn, but it can dwell on things, dwell and go back over things that you think might have gone wrong, trying to learn from what went wrong. We can plan for the future, but we can worry about what's going to happen. We can imagine and come up with creative ideas, and then we can imagine the worst case scenario. So this is really a tricky brain, and it shapes the way we think. So if we're fueling our minds and bodies with caregiving physiology, think of the moat behind surrounding the castle to let the drawbridge down, you'll get into the wisdom. But if that moat is full of threat and cortisol and adrenaline, then that drawbridge isn't coming down, and we're going to be living in a very different mindset. Very different mindset. So if this is you, don't worry, join the club, but it's going to affect your well-being, and it's going to affect the way you interact with work. Because if you are competitive or you're working with competitive colleagues, you can't feel safe. You just can't feel safe because they'll be competing or you'll be competing. And that might be fine if you're winning, but there is a cost to your well-being from that strategy. And there are other ways. So we've got 3 important affect regulation systems. And as I said, there are 2 ways to deal with threats. We've got the emotions that deal with the threats. Think of the emotions that get triggered at work: anger, anxiety, sadness. Anger, anxiety, sadness, disgust, all threat-based emotions. And we can choose to engage our motivation to compete, to go out, to do something, to acquire, to achieve, to compete, to go out, to do something, to acquire, achieve, to compete, to go out, to do something, to acquire, to achieve, in order to deal with threat. Or we can choose to develop a different relationship with that psychological threat, to develop feelings of safeness, of equanimity, of slowing down, of engaging our compassionate mind to deal with threat. The problem with the drive, as you noticed when I was talking, is it's addictive, because you're only ever as good as your last achievement. Only ever as good as your last achievement. So if you're striving and driving at work, got to be better, got to work harder, got to be better, got to stop people from finding out that I don't know what I'm doing, that I faked my way into this job, overstated my CV, got to work really hard now so everyone thinks I'm really good at what I'm doing, got to overwork, got to sign myself up to another course, buy a book I don't read, do some more CPD, do a secret master's, that'll prove that I'm clever enough, do. The problem is that you're only ever as good as your last achievement, and it's addictive. And it will lead to burnout. But there is another way. There is another way. You can learn to take good care of yourself and make peace with that competitive mentality that says, I'm not good enough. I'm faking my way through this. I'm not doing a good enough job. Everybody else is better than me. There is another way. You can develop self-compassion. Compassion habits. So it starts with you. It starts with you. As I say, you might be working in a system. You might be out there going, Deborah, you've no idea what it's like. You know, this isn't going to change. My system's not going to change. It might not, but it can change for you. Your relationship with it can change, and that will benefit you. And then you will be the starting point of a ripple of change. So it starts with you, and it starts with you developing self-awareness, awareness of yourself, and awareness of how you are at work, how people experience you. Remember that wonderful Maya Angelou quote, people will not remember what you said and they won't remember what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. So what's your emotional legacy in people's lives? When you enter and touch up against other people, what emotional legacy do you live? How do they hold you? What would they say about you? How do you respond to your own internal drive? What are your threats that you are experiencing? And how do you mitigate the impact? If you're very frightened and you use controlling strategies, you can come across as very dominant and controlling. It's not your fault. Not your fault. You're just trying to keep yourself safe. But the impact on your team might be very obvious. If you're a very big drive, you can get yourself quite out of kilter. This is quite a common pattern, actually, of caregivers working in caregiving systems like NHS and social care. We haven't necessarily looked after ourselves. So our sort of soothing system is underdeveloped, but we love a drive. We push ourselves. We're perfectionistic. We push. We like to write lists. We like to tick things off our list. Some of us, if you're a list writer out there, because you like to feel in control of your life, I will write a list. Some of us put things on our list that we've already done and achieved, just so we get that little tick hit. Start the day with a little tick. Okay, so think about it's just addictive. It's never ending. It's never ending. And the lists are never ending. And you finish one, you start another. Drive. So the systems can get quite out of kilter. So just have a little ponder in your own mind about how balanced you are, how balanced you feel you are, what systems dominate. Because this is kind of what burnout looks like. We can't use our drive any longer. We're so exhausted trying to heal emotional pain with doing something. So just listen to that. We're so exhausted by healing emotional pain by doing something, or healing psychological or social threat by doing something. So that means I'm not good enough, I'll work harder, rather than healing it with self-compassion. I'm not good enough. Come on, Deborah, let's sit down and let's have a little chat about that. Let's see if we can access our intuitive wisdom about that and work out what that's all about, and see if there's a way that you can enable yourself to be able to sit in a mind that knows that you are enough. And that sounds all nice, doesn't it? That compassionate chat. The problem is that it's easy said and hard to let in. So we're always working with our fears and our blocks about letting our compassion into our hearts and minds. But if we continually use our drive system to heal our emotional, psychological, social threats, we will be on a danger to burnout. And that means we can't even get out of bed any longer, can't keep on doing. We're just exhausted and we've lost our mojo. Okay. Burnt out minds where we don't have any pleasure, we can't look forward, we are sort of in states of inner dread. Our relationships get affected because our relationship with ourselves is self-critical. So it's not a safe, we don't even have a safe relationship with ourselves. Does that make sense? So the relationship you live in your mind isn't safe. It's full of self-criticism and self-loathing, and you might even get a bit paranoid and mistrust people's motivations, and can all just degenerate. And of course, you're living in these sort of trapped minds. Okay, so speaking to yourselves, creating an internal relationship with yourself, and you're just going to feel downranked. This is a rank. This is a hierarchy here, but you are actually your own hostile, dominant, powerful other in your mind, and you are creating a sense of downrank in your own mind. Does that make sense? So you are kind of orchestrating your own ill health. You are orchestrating your own anxiety, and over time maintaining your own states of anxiety and distress and depression. Social comparison is at the heart of all major psychopathologies. Self-criticism and shame is at the heart of all major psychopathologies and human distress, because it's absolutely linked to how we are supposed to function as human beings living in social groups. And if we find that difficult, if we can't form safe relationships with ourselves and others, then we're going to experience mental distress. And if we can't use our drive system to solve that problem and we collapse, then we may well be flawed by it, life, and actually in need of more formal help to work with our anxiety and depression. It's not your fault. It's not our fault. Annoyingly, self-compassion isn't on everyone's family curricula. It'd be good if it was. Self-compassion is learnt in our childhood. It's learnt. We learn it in our caregiving, and unfortunately, only a small percentage of us, like 26% of us, luck out because our parents attended the compassionate school of parenting before they had us and looked after our brains. So it's really easy for us humans to use our drive system rather than our self-compassion to look after ourselves. It's really easy. So we've got to learn the language. We've just got to learn the language. Got to learn. It's self-compassion is a language. Learn to speak to yourself. And just like a language has words, it has memories, it has meaning, it makes you feel, certain words make you feel certain things. So does self-compassion. So if any of you out there speak another language, so you speak another language, you could say the word sunset in your language. So if you could say the word sunset in your language and I could hear you, the likelihood is I wouldn't understand it because I only speak English and a bit of French. But actually, even if you said sunset in French, it would be a little bit meaningless to me. But if you said it in English, then I can hear it and I immediately imagine it. And I imagine memories associated of it. And I might even imagine some holidays, watching the sun go down. And then I feel warm and I feel connected just from a word that has meaning. So self-compassion is a language. We speak to ourselves in ways that are helpful and meaningful and wise, but we've got to be able to feel it. We've got to be able to feel it. And if we don't root our self-compassion in our physiology, in our body, then it can become a bit meaningless and we can end up, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. Because we all know what compassion is like, because I'm sure you're full of very good advice for your friends and families and colleagues even, but it's really more about letting it in for you and allowing it to be meaningful for you too. So we can have all sorts of fears and blocks about letting self-compassion in. But it starts with us becoming aware, mindful, noticing. So we're not doing anything other than becoming curious about our minds. Become the wise observer of your mind. Imagine that. You imagine watching your mind. Like if you were on a kind of on the moon looking down on Earth, watching, or as I always go back to my David Attenborough, watching, observing, curious. Gosh, look at me. Look at my mind. Look at my mind. Look at what it's doing, what it's up to. Look what my mind is saying. Can you imagine just being curious about it? That you begin to see your mind rather than be your mind. See it rather than be it. This is really important because then you start to observe what's going on in you. So begin to see your mind and all its shenanigans and all its kind of busyness rather than be caught up in it. Wise observer of your mind. And can you imagine just being curious rather than competitive or judgmental? Just curious. There you go again. You can't stop thinking that way. I'm so sick of the way I'm thinking. And start saying things like, gosh, isn't it interesting that I think like this? Gosh, there's that thought again. There's that thought I have. Even just labeling your thoughts gives a little bit of distance. And when you have a little bit of distance, you've got an opportunity to do something different. A little bit of distance between you and your thought creates a point of choice. Choice. Hang on a minute. Do I want to feel that thought? Or do I want to think of something that's going to be more helpful to me? So how about becoming aware us all becoming aware of our self-criticism. Remembering that self-criticism, social comparison, is at the heart of all major psychopathology. How about becoming aware of it, noticing how we talk to ourselves in our minds? And in order to do that, we've really got to start being a little bit present. Got to be present. And we can start being present by engaging in our breathing. I spelt resonant wrong, by the way, folks, and I forgot to change it. So I'm not going to criticize myself, though, because I'm with compassionate company. But we can learn to breathe. Now, some people think, oh, no, yeah, breath, oh, that's a bit kind of tree huggy. No, it's not. It's nature's greatest gift to our well-being. And when I'm doing my talks, often people don't like to focus on their breathing. And I have to say, I myself, as an avid yoga goer, many, many years ago, when I used to go to my yoga class, when I was drive, I would really not like the bit of the yoga class when we had to lie down and breathe. I found it really boring. Now I love it. It's amazing because it's rejuvenating. So there is a way to breathe, and there's a way to breathe helpfully. Smooth, rhythmical breath. It's called resonant breathing. And if we learn this art, we are immediately affecting our well-being. Now, some of us are breath holders. And some of you know that you're a breath holder. Some of us breathe really quickly. Some of us breathe up here down our chest. Some of us don't like to focus on our breathing if we've got sort of breathing difficulties, like asthma. Resonant breathing is nature's gift to your well-being. And if you learn how to breathe in a smooth and rhythmical way, and you learn to center your breath in your diaphragm, and you learn to breathe in and out through your nose, and you get the breath down to the depth of your lungs, the bottom quarter, and you make it smooth, and you get past that little barrier of anxiety which pops up, and you practice this every day, and you learn to focus on elongating your out breath, because the out breath is linked to the parasympathetic nervous system, and that releases the chemicals and the hormones that calm us down. And you learn to breathe in this smooth and rhythmical way, and you daily practice, and you start every meeting like this. You start every team meeting like this, and you check in with yourself throughout the day, a little bit like a speedometer, a temperature. How am I doing? You will notice a difference in your well-being, because calm minds think differently. And the two major systems, nervous systems, the sympathetic that raises our threat levels, and the parasympathetic that calms us down. The relationship between those two is called heart rate variability, and good sensitivity between the two systems, the parasympathetic regulating and calming the nervous system, will keep you in good heart rate variability, and that is linked to well-being. So that's why breath practice is your key. When I went along to my trust cognitive neuroscientists, because I wanted to do a little study improving heart rate variability in my clients who have PTSD, they said there's only two ways to do it. And I said, oh, good, it reduces the variables. And they said, you can take medication and it's got terrible side effects, or you can teach your clients how to breathe properly. And I said, are you sure? Because, they're veterans, and they might think it's a bit kind of, fluffy in breath. The breath, resonant breath, improves your heart rate variability. So just wanted to visually show you this slide. Not that, heart rate variability particularly looks like this, but I want you to realize that if you're living on the right-hand side with your self-criticism, maintaining your levels of threat and stress in your mind, then you're likely to have poor heart rate variability. And just by breath practice alone, you can neutralize the system. So just by breath practice alone, you can get to here. And when you're here, That means you've changed the moat around the castle. You're really changing the quality of the physiology around the castle, and that drawbridge will come down, and then you can enter your compassionate minds and start thinking with wise, kind, empathic ways, looking after yourself. Okay, so heart rate variability is linked to well-being and pro-social behavior. Okay, and when we're in that castle, then we've got access to these wonderful brains that are empathic and mindful and aware and regulatory and have a higher order problem solving. Now, Einstein, I'm sure some of you remember, he used to write about compassion, did you know? And he said that compassionate people are geniuses and more necessary to humanity than the developers of knowledge. Isn't that interesting? Compassionate people are social geniuses and more necessary to the survival of humanity than the developers of knowledge and tech. Isn't that interesting? Thank you, Einstein. So we've got some habits to learn. We've got to notice that criticism. We've got to learn the art of breathing. We've got to engage with that cocktail of emotion by using imagery, me at my most compassionate, and then we open our mouths and we listen to what we're saying to ourselves. Compassion habits. I notice, I settle, I engage my motivation through imagery, and then I open my mouth, then I open my mind, and I listen to what it is that I need to hear. Noticing, attending, reflecting, regulating, emphasizing, sympathizing, planning. Compassionate minds. What's not to love about that? Here I am again, feeling a bit rubbish. Creating my own internal state. And compassion to the rescue. Let's start in the body. Remember, physiology rooted in the body through breath practice and imagery. And then let's bring to mind things that are helpful. We've got really tricky human brains. It's not our fault that we're competitive and we're competing and that we've got lots of self-criticism. It's not our fault, okay? We're allowed to feel disappointed at things at work or upset. Sometimes we make mistakes. Common humanity. We're all human. We all do things that aren't our finest hours and our finest moments. But how can we bring compassion? How can we help ourselves in these moments rather than ruminate and go round and round and round and maintain our own distress? How can we bring compassion? Let's start with compassionate wisdom rooted in the body and engage with the suffering and do something about it. And that, as I said before, is a language. And it's a language you learn through your compassion habits. You at your best, doing what you can, helping each other. Everything that you do being framed with, how can I be helpful? How can I help myself in this moment? How can I be helpful to my colleagues in this moment? Compassion habits. Now, compassionate minds are wise, and I know you're wise, and I know you've got a lot of intuitive wisdom because of the way that you care for others and in the way that you would offer advice and comfort to those that you love and care for. So that is the good news, that you're full of knowledge and understanding and wisdom. What we have to do, you, me, everyone, is let it into our own minds. Let it in. Our lovely, compassionate advice for others. Walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk. Let it into you. So just in the last 15 minutes of this, I want to talk to you about your teams, compassion habits for your team. There you are, doing your bit for yourself. You're the drop in the ocean that creates the wave. And you realize this, that we have to create emotional landscapes. We've got to create seas of change. And the more safe we all feel together, the better our team will function. So how am I going to inspire my team? Because the problem is with competitive leadership, that it's not very nice. And some of you might be working with competitive leaders. You might now be going, oh, I'm a bit competitive. That's all right. Again, join the club, join the human club, but do something about it if it's causing you distress or you want to create a different atmosphere in your team. But if we are using competitive rank, get safe strategies to regulate the social group, then we are going to create problems in our leadership style. So we really need to take stock, because we really want to inspire our colleagues to want to work for us because they feel safe and they feel secure. So they want to help us rather than because they're frightened of us. Because if people start getting frightened, then they don't use supervision properly. They don't report mistakes. If you're living in a blame culture, it's too scary. So actually, that's why practice sometimes gets a little bit less than optimal when people are threatened. You don't get better stuff out of people by frightening them. Okay, so you need to take stock, folks, as a team and think about what are our team threats and what is our team response. Okay, are we all overworking? Are we sacrificing, committing to the team? Do we say kind of not very nice things about the person that manages to keep their hours? What, slacking, going home early? Where, oh, we're still here doing all the work, are we? You know, what goes on? What's the chatter in the team? Because you see, the chatter, it's not just about you. You create the atmosphere of living in threat. So the whole team heart rate variability gets affected. So you just go and stand by the coffee machine and hear the negative hum. Can you believe they said that? Can you believe they said that? Oh, I can't believe they said that. Yeah, they said that, didn't you? Yeah, well, you know what they're like. You know what they're like. Nice new person comes to work. Hello, I'm you. Well, that won't last. You don't realize how rubbish it is here. Just you wait. You won't be happy and smiley in a week's time. Oh, good-o. So we all create this atmosphere together collectively, and that's why we kind of need team compassion ultimately if we're really going to address compassionate well-being in our workforce. Okay, so here's another little habit for you. You at your best. You at your best. Now that doesn't mean perfectionist. That means I'm here doing the best I can. I haven't slept last night, a bit under the weather, you know, got little newborn baby, or I'm not very well, got stuff going on, but I'm here. I might not be on 4 cylinders, but I'm here, and I'm here with good intent, doing what I can. Me at my best. And I'm going to orientate my mind with, how can I be helpful? My intent is good. So can you imagine every interaction that you have with your colleagues, and you just spend a moment going, how can I be helpful in this situation? How can I be helpful? Can you imagine when you notice your critic, that you say to yourself, how can I be helpful? And you can use imagery to help you with this, because you can bring to mind you at your best, you imagining caring for a loved one, friend or family, or your children, you caring. How can I be helpful to me? And use that imagery to bring online the feelings, you at your best. How can I hear without denying the messages that I'm being told? How can I hear without making judgments? Now, the thing is, we all make judgments. We're all judgmental. You know, it's a byproduct, but we don't need to fuel it. So when we're talking about being mindful or being compassionate, we are not all going to turn into the embodiment of the Dalai Lama, unfortunately. What we're going to do is notice that we're being naughty, notice that we're being self-criticizing, notice that we're being judgmental of others, noticing we're talking about other people behind their back, noticing that we're undermining the management, and then choosing to do something different. So it's not going away, the judgments. It's what we choose to fuel in our minds. We can't help it. We're socially comparative. But if we play stock to it and we fuel it, then it becomes dangerous. So how can I hear without judging, without denying, without placing covert pressure on people? Right? Now, this is tricky because, you know, we work with a bunch of caregivers, so they want to be helpful. They want to be helpful. So we don't want to take advantage of that good nature. We really don't, but it's very easy to. How can I listen with curiosity so I can learn? How can I listen with humility and humanity? If you are a leader or a manager, even if you're in a position of new management, can you imagine going to your team and saying, how do you want me to lead you so that I get the best out of you? You help create the leader that you want to lead you. Help me. Don't come in with your fancy ideas and your management style and this is how we do things around here, because you'll just disenfranchise your staff. How can we co-create an atmosphere? I know I am the manager and the leader. I get paid more than you. I'm on a higher, grade, and I've got to deliver on the tasks, on the deliverables, but I can create emotional and psychological equity here. How can we do this? What's stopping? What's getting in the way? How can we do things? So that might take you, for instance, a little maybe a little team away day or something. If you were going to take this back and actually consider doing it, you might need to do as a sort of an away day exercise when you really have a conversation about what's going on. Now, the problem with this is that people don't like being honest. They either don't like being honest, and when you give them permission to be honest, they just go, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. So it really helps if we're all being rooted with self-compassion in these conversations. So I will often go into a team and I'll say, let's do a little team formulation. Let's work out what's going on. Let's work out what our fears are and what our threats are and what is the kind of the quality of our social relating. And then let's close that system down and let's bring online. Let's change the physiology. So let's do some exercise, some compassion habits to change the physiology, to have our compassionate minds. Let's imagine that we were being paid to consult the compassionate solution. What can we do now? How can we create team cohesion when we have team fragmentation? And one of our struggling teams is really struggling since COVID, really. The one very simple thing they did was create a kind of like Microsoft Teams. They created a team chat, and every morning everybody says on the chat, morning, I'm working in early road today. Oh, I'm working from home today. I'm out doing that home visit. Just that, and the difference that's made. We've got this wonderful administrative lady who remembers everybody's birthday, and we have a CUDA, what was it called, a CUDA board, the ones, for everyone's birthday wishes. So everybody gets a birthday wish on their birthdays. Things like that matter. Just simple team chat. Where are you? This is where I am today. Is quite transformative. If you're having a team meeting, then be present, but give people permission to be absent. So if you're at the team meeting, put your laptop away and listen. But if you really have so many emails to do and so much work to do, then please, you have our permission to be absent and not come to the team meeting. But please don't come to the team meeting and keep your laptop on and do all your emails. That's an example, very brief ways of changing habits that bring about team cohesion. Now, if you were wanting to do this type of exercise with your teams, then there are really kind of a few things to think about, and that's a quick win, a chat, isn't it? But enablers might take a little bit more kind of effort, and process changing processes and systems, that can take a bit of effort, because, like, for instance, we've now had to work out a hybrid model where, because some people just don't want to come in any longer. Lots of people travel a lot to the workplace, and of course they're benefiting from working from home, especially when they've set their childcare arrangements up around the kind of COVID stuff. So we've had to really think about what is the optimal level of hybrid. If you work full time, you can work 2 days at home and 3 days in, and can we get everybody in once a month for the management meeting and the team meeting? Everybody come and let's have lunch afterwards. System changes take more time, but compassion in practice, compassion habits, the more you socialize the team into that notion of let's start the day the compassion way, let's start the team with a well-being exercise. So for instance, our team meeting, we rotate. So a different team member every week has the responsibility of finding a new well-being exercise. Internet's full of great things like mindful colouring in or things like that. And it just takes a moment to do something a little different. And then we check in. How are you? How are you? And we mean it. How are you, everyone? And we have reflective, compassionate practice. And we have reflective, compassionate leadership practice. So if we were thinking of implementing something in a system, this is what we did. We have leadership well-being workshops for all. I'll probably call them compassionate well-being workshops because, as I said, we learned when we called them leadership that people didn't come because they didn't think it was for them. Some grades didn't come. But we do the leadership so that we've got everybody socialized in compassion principles and habits. Okay, so we're all bringing the best version of ourselves to work. And that doesn't mean, hey, smiley, hello, hi. It means I'm here, I'm self-aware, I'm having a bad day, I'm grumpy, I can take responsibility for grumpy. I'm sorry, I was a bit grumpy in the team meeting. That's compassionate because you're taking ownership. So, like I'm the head of the service. I could easily, play my stuff out in the meeting, be grumpy and say, do this, do that. And then I'm too kind of ashamed really to go back and say, oh, I'm so sorry because I haven't got self-compassion at the party. So I just ignore it and pretend nothing's happened and get on with it. Just creates a bit of friction. But self-compassion doesn't mean that we're all looking like we're on, hi. It means that, I'm just being authentic and aware of how I tread in other people's hearts and minds and lives. And then team together. We spend time working out our team charter, our compassionate pledge. So we've got an idea of a compassionate pledge, which we help people. This is how we do things around here. You come and work in our team, and this is how we do things around here. And then we keep that alive with the reflective practice. We keep ourselves on track with the reflective practice. So that's just a little structure of a group. I won't go through that. It'll be in your handouts if you ever wanted to run it. And that's what we do. Self-compassion, compassion habits, creating cultures by team habits, leading through the principles, the science, developing team compassion, and then keeping it alive with staff support groups. So folks, I'm coming to the end of my talk, and there are 2 other slides that you can read at your leisure, because this is a little red traffic lights from NHS Education for Scotland, which was brilliant and really helpful during COVID. Have a little look at that in your own time and do something if you're in amber, and really do something if you're in red. Get yourself back into green. And here are some strategies that you can have a look at that can help you get from red to amber back into green. And I wish you well, and I really hope this whirlwind tour has made you think, reflect, be motivated to look after yourself. And I really do wish you well. And remember, please, to keep your home fires burning. Stoke up yourself. Keep yourself well, because you matter and the job you do really matters. And it matters to every person that you help. But you matter to your friends and your family. And the thing that you will be most proud of at the end of your life were the qualities of the relationships that you made and sustained. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope I will meet some of you again. For those of you that are interested in this, actually, we're running a retreat, a self-practice retreat, compassion-focused therapy from the inside in your lovely Donegal. So if any of you want to join us on that and do a little bit of self-practice, you'll find the details, I think, on Tally's EventWise website. So I might see you there. And I know I'm working with some of you on the trial, and I get to supervise you, which is lovely. So take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon. And don't forget the emotional wake you live in people's lives. Thank you.